refresh themselves on some North Carolina contracts and forms. Now, there's a slogan. Perfect. We are not going to be able, obviously, to go through every North Carolina form today, but we are going to start with probably the most important and work our way through to what else we can get to. I want to say hello to Motivation Mortgage is here with us today. We've got Matt from Motivation Mortgage. Would you like to share anything this morning with us?
I'm sure I can jump in and just kind of
as it pertains to what we're talking about. Perfect. Perfect. And we are recording this for people that are, not able to attend right now. So if you want to say something important, you need to come stand near my computer or else it won't be up. All right. So what I was thinking we were going to do today is just basically using our platforms, using our Realty One tools, going through, opening up a contract, and really just kind of filling out a contract using our SkySlope forms. So this is kind of dual purpose. You guys get into using your tools here, but also we're going to talk about the contents of the contract and the nuances of it and how some of us fill these things out. And if you have questions along the way, please answer. But the less we, I guess, talk, the more we can get to, because we're going to try to keep this to an hour today. Did you want to say anything, Logan, before we get started? You're going to give us your 2 cents as we get through here?
Yeah, I'll wait till you start. I mean, yeah, I've got a pretty good grasp on these contracts, and there are better ways. I mean, I guess my gist would just be that there are better ways at doing contracts than just filling them out like everybody else. I mean, there are actual things in the contracts that matter that aren't just like trying to fill in the blanks and go. And it depends on whether you represent the buyer or the seller of the contracts. So I think today we're just gonna assume that we're representing the buyer for these, right? Because obviously, if you're on the flip side of the transaction, you might not want to see the same things. But for today's training, we're just gonna, go with the premise that we're writing these contracts as a buyer's agent. Okay. So is this your property or what?
I'm asking Monique permission to use her listing as for
okay, all right,
for
good.
training purposes. You're like, huh? That looks familiar.
Wow, you're gonna come to a training and get an offer on your property. That's a great twofer. Yeah.
Just for people in the Zoom, this is Monique's listing. She's here with us today, so we're just going to pull hers as a example for completing these forms today.
I will not participate.
You're not going to participate? Oh yeah, don't give us any information because we're going to be writing up a contract. So now I'm going to go back to my tab. Oh gosh, where's my forms? Here we go. Share this tab instead. Okay, so if we were writing a contract for Monique's property, obviously I went to MLS. I got her MLS number, and I'm going to be using that to start working on these forms. This is when I start a file in my forms. I always click this button here that says create. I know there are other ways to get to the documents, but I feel this is the most efficient way to start a file. It's going to gather all the information up front and make everything organized. So this is how I do it. Okay, so we're going to be working with a buyer for this contract. It's going to be me. It's going to be me. We're going to plug in. Oh, that's tomorrow, Logan.
Oh, today's my day for my meme?
Today's the day.
Yeah, it's my favorite meme of all time. Oldest ones.
Please. Yes, we will be reminding everybody about that. If there was if I had a co-buyer, I would be placing their information here as well. But you see how I just pulled over the MLS information by importing the MLS number. A lot easier than typing it all in there myself. You can name your files whatever you like. I'm going to name mine this. And we do have, I just named it the address of the property and I put buyer, but sometimes I put the person's last name. We do have templates available for you guys. So if you don't feel like finding all the forms that you're going to need, you can work with templates. I don't know. It depends on, sometimes I use a template. Sometimes I don't. Logan, do you?
I
pull
always
the
start
templates?
with the template. I mean, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and then you can have your own personal templates that you guys can create in Forms if you're interested in learning about that. I'm sure there's a tutorial in Forms about making your own templates. But we have the Revolution Fire. And you can see this template has 10 forms in it. We're likely not going to need all of those forms, and that's why sometimes I skip templates because I just don't feel like I need all those forms that day. But we can always, delete the forms we don't need from this file.
but if we're making an offer on the property, we've assumed that you've already filled out working with realtors, right? And
Mhm.
buyer's agency agreements and all that stuff. So I don't think you were planning on really going over that stuff today. So technically you may have started this template. A lot of times I use the person's last name as the template because I'm starting the template prior to knowing what property they're making an offer on, right? Because if we're supposed to get working with realtors done and some sort of compensation agreement or a buyer's agency agreement done before, well, I don't know what house they're going to buy at that time, but I still just use this 10 form template, but just what as I just use like the Smith dash buyer or whatever.
Yeah, you're
As my
right.
template.
This file would not have been named after this address because it would have been called like
Right.
Grant Buyer or something, because I would have already had the buyer's agency and I
Yeah.
would have already had the working with realtors and potentially some other stuff in there
And
too.
then that way I just, when I'm ready to write the offer, I just go back to the file that I've already created with these people to try to keep everything as concise and, and organized as possible. But yeah, so we're just jumping ahead a little bit in this. So yeah, I mean, technically you shouldn't be getting the professional services disclosure done now because, they haven't even gotten the house. A lot of agents do it at the same time just to try to get it. But, and then the same thing with the cooperating, like, compensation agreement, you don't really know about that just yet, or you get a compensation agent.
Mhm.
The other one, I'm probably always looking at the additional provision, because I rarely ever with expiration. And so, yeah, at the time I'm doing the offer to purchase, I'm almost always doing the additional.
But
Yeah,
gonna
click
kind of
on it.
tell you
We'll
what we
go
do.
through it so
Yeah.
that people can see how. Well,
And yeah, probably get to this one too.
Yeah.
Professional disclosure. So I'm going to go ahead and fill and send. Also, at this point, if you were writing an offer for somebody, you are going to need them to sign what else about this property? Who knows? Disclosures. Thank you.
Yeah.
And where would I get those disclosures? From Monique's listing, because I saw she already has them in there. And I would download them to my computer and I would upload them to this file because I'm going to want them to sign all of this stuff at one time. We're going to skip that for now. Okay. Taylor, can you let that person in the room? Are you able to do that? Okay. Unfortunately, it does not bring over the seller's information when you're doing this. So you do have to get the seller's information from either tax records or Monique, do you want me to tell me the seller's name so I can just put it in here?
Last name? Sure. Not near. N-A-I-R.
N-A-I-R. Oh, like the, okay. I'll just put an initial here. Oh, really? Okay. I'll just put an initial. Okay, I'm going to save that. Of course, there may be more than one seller, but for this purpose, we'll just do that. Okay. Let's get into it here. So this property will not include a manufactured mobile home, and this property will not include an off-site or separate septic lot boat slip. Now, where would I have gotten this information from? I could ask the listing agent if I'm not sure. The MLS is going to give me some information. The property disclosure is going to give me some information. Of course, if you're not sure, you always have to speak to the listing agent. Sometimes they're not sure. Okay, legal description. I know a lot of people sometimes kind of don't completely fill this out. I really think it's in your best interest to completely fill that out because when this does go to an attorney, I mean, they are looking at this contract to get certain details about the property from whoever's filled it out. So we want to fill it out as completely as possible. I usually get this information from the tax record because all that comes through when I link the MLS number is the property ID, which is nice, the PIN number.
And that only comes over from certain counties.
From certain county. Oh yeah, like if you're in a different county, it won't do that. And sometimes I actually have to open up the full. I'm going to share this tab with you guys so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, we got the property
so this
card
is the
here.
easiest thing is you just copy this L3B2. Yeah, copy that entire line and then put that into the other description. That is essentially what they're asking for at the top of the contract when they're saying lot, block, page. But I just copy that whole line and then put it into other descriptions. It's the same information that they're asking for at the top. It's just the way that it's described on the tax sites. They just put it all together.
So it's lot 3.
Yeah.
Block
So,
2.
Yeah, I don't go back
Map
and
12.
do all that stuff. But yeah.
Now, if you weren't sure about the, sometimes the subdivision is unclear. And it is a little unclear in this situation because legally it's named something else. But traditionally speaking, we refer to it as Cotswold. Logan, do you usually put the traditional?
I don't fill out any of those top lines up there.
Okay.
I just put the other description because between the property identification number, which is this, and then the other description, that is the legal description of how they would look it up.
Yeah, that's how doing the title.
That
work
is
and
the
everything.
lot and block and the page number and the deed book all in one thing. So, and it's just how realist, that's how realist this lays them out. But every property, regardless of county, will have a legal description. Now, some of them are really long because they might say, this is in Britannia, phase 1, lot 23 of page that, so some of these descriptions can get really long depending on how the neighborhoods were recorded. But,
Mhm.
Allison, I'll just tell you when I tried to put in the actual name of that subdivision.
Mhm.
It accepts it.
yeah, because MLS.
Oh, in the MLS when you were putting it in?
Yeah, because MLS, they approved only the subdivisions that they think are legally. So that's what I'm saying. Like, attorneys are only going to go by the two things that I just described. The property identification number, they use first off, they go off the county. That's the first thing they look at, but that's already filled in here. The county, the PIN number, the identification number, and the legal description. Those are the only 3 things they need to do the title of.
But you've got Cotswold in there.
Yeah, it is
Well-
Cotswold. It is Cotswold, but it has an actual name.
Oh, and it wouldn't let you put that.
It won't allow
Yeah,
Mhm.
it. You
exactly.
just
Yeah.
have to go to, it's like Mason's Bend or whatever. It'll say phase 1. lot
Or sometimes it
whatever.
says PH, which
Yeah.
stands for phase.
So you just have to shorten it.
And some of them use Roman numerals. I don't even know how to type that in here. I mean, so that's what I'm saying. I just use the legal description and the property identification number. That's worked good. So
Okay, so we're gonna just do for our purchase price today, for these purposes, we're gonna do her listing price, which was
Oh, come
one.
on.
yeah. Just 165, Allison. Come on now.
Wait, it was 1,000,000.
Yeah, $15. Yeah.
That's correct though, right, Monique?
What, I can't see that.
I'm sorry. Do you want to sit? Can
No, it's fine.
okay,
Well, she did
or I can move all of this closer.
Yeah.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
a little better.
Okay. Or do you want to turn the light off, Logan? Usually
light
I
off,
turn that
maybe?
light off so
Yeah,
that
that's
the
a good
screen's
idea.
easier to. Is that better?
Better on your eyes. Or...
Okay. Y'all tell me. I don't know. I'm just looking at my computer. Okay. So due diligence fee. I mean, we're not going to get into a whole discussion about
Well, I mean, let's just say, like,
Negotiating
what would
contracts,
somebody
but-
expect their clients to be offering for due diligence on a 1.5 house?
That's only been on the market
2 days.
2 or 3 days,
Friday.
Friday. maybe.
15 grand.
Yeah. No.
Christina's
What?
like,
I mean, I usually make it equivalent to 1 month's mortgage.
So what would 1 month?
You could take it off the market if it's not a multiple offer situation.
Okay. I would on a 1.5.
$8,000 on 1.5.
Yeah.
This is where the mortgage people come
Probably 10
in.
or 12 grand for 1 month, but yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't-
You could take it off the market.
Anything less than 10 grand here would be considered pretty weak.
Mhm.
If I'm the listing agent, I'm asking for 25 to 40 on a house of this price. But anything less than 10 grand in North Carolina, especially, would be considered fairly weak.
And to what Christina's saying, like, you're considering that like the damages if they were to have to put the house back on the market.
Right.
But there's also other damages, like now the house is back on, sorry. back.
All right. So yeah, so we were talking about earnest money.
Bill Gallagher.
So yeah, the
Back
way
to Bill
that-
Gallagher.
Earnest money doesn't really have a place in the contracts till the end of due diligence, right? Now, the reason why I started off doing this way is because for about the first 8 years that we had this, the contract used to lie to buyers. It used to say that you can terminate the contract during any time during your due diligence period and receive your earnest money back. Now, that is not true because you cannot unilaterally terminate the contract and receive your money back. What it failed to tell them, with it now, if you go to the next page, they have a little blue box where they're trying to explain. Yeah, so now they're trying to explain some of these things better. But buyer's understanding is that if they back out during the contract, during the due diligence period, they receive their earnest money back, right? The problem was sellers needed to sign that form. They still do, okay? And if a seller decided just not to sign it for whatever reason, you don't get your earnest money back. Then this buyer still has to take the seller to court to try to get their earnest money back, even if the buyer did everything right, even if they terminated during their due diligence period. If the seller just wants to be a pain in the ass or just is bitter about them terminating their contract, or just for whatever reason they drop off the face of the earth, if the seller doesn't sign the termination with release of funds, your buyer does not get their funds back. And even if it goes on for more than, I think it's 2 years, whoever's holding the earnest money is required to send that to the North Carolina Department of Escheatment. And then good luck going through that process. Well, the easiest and most, best way to be around this is you just don't use any initial earnest money. You just put all of that in additional earnest money. You make your additional earnest money date the same date as your due diligence period ends. So due diligence ends at 5 o'clock, and then also on that day by 5 o'clock is your earnest money due. This way, if the contract goes south for any reason during the due diligence period, your buyer's earnest money is never at risk. Okay. And it's pretty easy, just, fill in whatever, for a contract like this, I don't know, whatever. Okay, sure.
Well, 10? Okay. Whatever you
Yeah,
want.
or something, yeah, of substance. But now these funds, they do need to be either an official bank check or a wire check because they need to be clearable on the day that you're writing in here. So whatever date you use for your due diligence period, so if you're going out 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever you're doing, those dates just need to coincide. Okay.
Let's say we're going to have 3 weeks of due
Sure, yeah,
diligence.
that sounds good.
So maybe the 20th. So that would be the date that this would be due.
That's right. So yeah, the date that your due diligence is up is the date that your 10,000. This is also the way commercial contracts are written. If you've ever heard the term goes hard, like somebody's money goes hard, that means the other part of their deposit is due. Commercial contracts also don't have upfront earnest money because it kind of restricts the free use of the due diligence period, right? If you have all this money on the table and it's hard for it to get it back, but that's your job to understand that because buyers don't understand. They just think the contract says, well, if I back out, I get my money back. But unfortunately, we know that that's not how North Carolina contracts are written. So I've been doing this for over 10 years. Like I said, North Carolina Real Estate Commission, I learned it in a CE originally. And then Bill Gallagher at the Superior School was teaching it for, I don't know how, I think he's done teaching, but whenever he was teaching. So
Do you still encounter listing agents that have no idea what
I
you're
mean,
talking
just
about,
old
never
ones that
seen
like
it
Alan
before?
Tate, or something. I mean, they'll just be like, I've never seen this before. And you'll be like, well, does due diligence or does earnest money have a point of the contract before due diligence is up? And then they just agree, no. Like, all right, because this is cleaner for everybody. Because then if you do want to terminate during due diligence, all you do is send them over the termination. You don't need to get anything back in return. You just say, thank you very much. My buyers have decided to move on. Best of luck to you and your sellers. Boom, done. Contract's over. So it's actually cleaner and easier for both agents on both sides. It's easier for both firms on both sides, and it's certainly a way better way to write the contracts for your buyers. Okay. Doesn't change anything with the lending stuff. It's just they're gonna have to wait a couple extra weeks to source those funds versus if they were initial earnest money. But from anyone who's gone through an earnest money dispute, they can tell you that it's do it this way. There's no reason during due diligence to be in a dispute over earnest money. They don't have a point in the contract until it's over. So, and so then down here, just gonna the name. Since our firm doesn't hold escrow, and most firms are getting away from that anyways, just whoever you are going to use as the closing attorney is the best place. That way, all the funds are in somewhere. Your buyer will also be sending the additional earnest money to that same place. Okay, so a lot of times people ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously, like we talked about, the due diligence date is the next blank. So,
okay, so we can choose.
We're
going to pick a date.
They just I think scroll up just like a half of an inch. Okay, so this contract's from July of 2024. That was the last time it was updated. Also, just so everybody knows, North Carolina is not telling us anymore when they update forms. They are just updating them. Okay. For instance, the listing agreement just changed in February, I think. Our little templates that we were using had an out-of-date one. On SkySlope, if you see the form that's either like kind of grayed out, or if you upload it, it'll say at the top, a new form of this is available, and you can click here to just start using the new form. So, but this was an ad that they did last. So if you're writing it in this purpose, we're picking a due diligence date. The thing that I would just mention to people about this here is, it's hard to do the additional earnest money and then also do the period extending to a certain amount of days. Although this is a better option is the days, because the problem with putting in a hard date on it is that you don't know how long the negotiations are going to take before you're actually considered under contract. So that's why they added this second checkbox, is because what they're running into is agents would write a offer on a Friday. It wouldn't actually get executed till Tuesday. Well, now technically 4 or 5 of their due diligence days have been just taken up by negotiation. Then the buyer realizes like, oh crap, I only have 14 days left or whatever for due diligence. So that's why they added the second box there, was to make that a little bit more fluid.
Yeah, but also when if you're negotiating back and forth, when you do go to sign a final contract, just always make sure you go through everything again and adjust that date if it has been like several days of negotiation. Just make sure you just double check when you go back through everything.
And I mean, due diligence, pretty standard, is pretty close to 3 weeks still. I mean, during COVID, it had gotten down to maybe like 15 days while the market was super duper crazy. But most of what we're still seeing now is about 3 weeks. If it's a complicated property or complicated transaction with land or something like that, you'd obviously need to extend that out past 30 days. But
oh, and we had put the 30th for due diligence, which is a little bit more than 4 weeks, but that's what we put in here. So are we going to make the closing for this property like? No, we put May 30th. Yeah.
No, you put the 16th. Put the closing as 30th and then go back and change the due diligence.
I thought I put, what did I put up here?
16.
I gotta go all the way. Did I put 16? I don't, sorry, guys. Gotta scroll up. Okay, let me change this to 16. So you wouldn't want, you know, obviously your closing to be the 17th.
Right.
So what do you guys think would be a good closing date for a property like this? It's not like land. We're not doing all this extensive stuff here. We got to get a loan. So typically 30, 45 days is typically when you
Yeah, I
want to
mean,
close.
anywhere between 30 and 60 days, if there's a mortgage involved, is pretty typical.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we can.
Okay. Scrolling on down. Talking about fixtures. Fixtures should be, if they're excluded, they should be listed in the MLS. So you should know that already. Items leased by the seller. So these are things in the home that are not owned by the seller. So this is where the seller would be telling you, hey, the washer and dryer, I don't own it. I rent it.
Or
So
solar panels are the big one here.
yeah, solar panels.
There was a program with Duke Energy, I think that only lasted maybe a year, where they were leasing them through a separate company, but it like somehow had something to do with Duke. And so yeah, I mean the big one that you need to be worried about here is solar panels. For you know, it's a big ticket item. These people might still owe 10, 15, 20 grand on these solar panels, or they might owe 5 years of X amount of energy costs, whatever. So yeah, I mean, that's obviously if you encounter solar panels, certainly ask the question. But I usually put NA.
Anything to put here, Monique? Okay.
See, what I would actually put, if you're making an offer, I would leave this blank, because to me, this is something that the sellers need to be filling out, not us as the buyer's agent.
Sure.
So,
Unless you confirmed
yeah.
it with them.
Yeah,
Unless
if
you had a
confirmed it with them,
conversation.
then put NA, but
Is your buyer assuming the lease then, or that would be something
yeah,
different?
that's what it is, but it needs to be disclosed up front. So sometimes you'll see in there that, yeah, I sold a house in Barber Rock or Barberville, whatever it's called. And they had like 4 years left on their lease with the solar panels. And so the buyers had to assume the lease of it. Or if the buyers didn't, if they pushed back on it more, there's a buyout option, like there is like on a car lease. But luckily the buyers were okay with it. It was like $100 and something a month for like the next like 4 years. But my sellers also like gave them all these like statements that they had their energy and showed the credits they were selling back and this and that. So it was a little bit more of a complicated thing than just putting in here, but yeah.
Okay, next we have
So yeah, it doesn't
items,
convey,
did
you're
not
gonna put in
convey.
like, you know, grandma's chandelier or, you know, whatever.
Sometimes
that sort
it's
of stuff.
even I've seen like certain plants
Trees
in
in
the
the
yard,
backyard that
like
are
special
planted,
plants
yeah.
that they're gonna dig up and take with them.
Yeah, they're very
Um,
fluffy under the crepe myrtle in the back. I've
Yeah.
had that happen on a couple.
But if you're unsure, so like Logan said, you could.
Both, I guess. There's some sort of program where you can literally like, yeah, plant the remains of something and it grows. I forget the type of tree that it is. It was like, yeah, there's a thing.
But if you didn't know the answer to this and you haven't gotten a clear answer from the listing agent, you could leave it blank and draw to their attention when you send this, like, I didn't know if there were any exclusions, so please make sure you include those if you know.
Right.
Okay, so we'll just leave that one blank. Okay, personal property. So this is
Yeah,
where
so I mean,
we're gonna.
this, you know, type whatever you want, refrigerator, washer, dryer. But guys, like if you're getting much past fridge, washer and dryer, pool table, like if it's much past that, you probably should just be doing a separate bill of sale. So you could put in here, you know, see additional bill of sale agreement or whatever. I mean, I will say that just like, you know, and Matt, you can opine on this if you want, but like, if it's not a normal thing, like if they're buying there's houses now where they're buying all the furniture to make it an Airbnb, this and that, like this is not the place for that. Because an appraiser is going to see this and they're going to have to place some sort of item of value on things that are not considered like normal and customary to go with the house. But I've even seen, people have chicken coops on here nowadays. Like that's a personal property item that's staying. Anything that's not attached to the property that you want to stay technically should be in here. But I mean, if you
Nothing
just
of
have
great
something-
value. Nothing of great value.
Right.
should
And
be-
then, Allison already typed it in there, but, something that I was big on about 7 or 8 years ago was, I typed like fridge, washer and dryer, appliances, whatever, in the home during the showing on whatever the date is. There's been hundreds, if not thousands of cases just on agents that I know alone where like seller had a $5,000 fridge, but they threw the one in the garage that was like a grandma special from 86 in the kitchen because all it said was refrigerator must convey, not like the Bosch
Specific.
5500 model or whatever that they had in there. So just,
Yeah.
that. And I would hate to stand up here and admit how many wine fridges and microwaves I've purchased in my career, but they should be going in there. And if there's multiple ones, you need to have multiple ones in there. And yeah, especially back in the day, like microwaves that used to go in like a little cabinet above your
Yeah, they're not really
oven.
attached. They're just like mine in my house just sits on a shelf on a cabinet. So
Right, those aren't considered in there. I purchased many microwaves an hour before closing. Certainly probably at least 5 or 6 mini fridges.
Question that I've actually heard back and forth on TVs that are affixed to the wall,
No,
because that's personal property.
yeah,
right?
the
the TV is,
Yeah, the
but the
TV is.
mount
The
is
bracket,
considered
yeah, right?
an
Yeah.
attachment,
That's how I practice.
which is nice because the sellers don't have to take down the mount. They can just leave it there.
Yeah, the problem it's okay now because the brackets are almost all universal. The dick thing back in the day used to be the seller would leave and take the 2 things that attached to their TV,
Exactly.
leave this big bracket on your wall that then the buyer couldn't even use because you need the 2 things. But now that it's all pretty universal, it's not as big of a sticking point. But gosh, in the early 2000s, when people first started hanging TVs on the wall, they'd make holes this big. They were putting
Yeah.
huge bolts through it. It was a massive ordeal back then. Now it's pretty easy because it's just universal.
Well, now
So the
there are
bracket-
agents who still think that TV are part of that.
Are part of it. Yeah, no, that needs to be considered personal property. Because a lot of sellers are leaving TVs, especially outdoor TV, basement TV, kind of not your normal living room TV. A lot of people are leaving those kind of secondary in whatever, the 10th TV in the bonus room or whatever.
We all
So-
have so many TVs. It's like not,
Right,
and they're
yeah,
they're so inexpensive now. It's like not even that big of a deal.
Yeah,
And then this does call out, don't put anything in here that a lender would have an issue with, talking about like things that have a lot of value.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that, do you ever run into problems with
The
that?
way I've always described it, outside of like your fridge, your washer, your dryer, imagine if you could pick that house up and flip it upside down.
Right.
Anything that falls cannot convey on that purchase contract. If you have an addendum, don't send it to us. That's perfectly fine. You don't
Yeah.
have to buy it, but you put it on an addendum that we do not see.
Mhm.
Because an underwriter and appraiser, whether those things have some sort of inherent value that cannot be included in that purchase price.
That's right. Yep, perfect.
Or
Yeah.
bill of sale, we do that too.
Yeah, but I don't talk about the bill of sale
No.
there, and I don't also check the box in additional contracts, because if those boxes are checked, then they're gonna ask you, the underwriter's gonna ask you for it.
Mm-hmm. Get a break on filling things out here. Okay. Buyer representations. Funds to complete the purchase. How is the buyer purchasing this home? Are they going to pay cash? We would check this box right here. And then we would let them know, are we attaching a proof of funds, or is that not attached to this,
Yeah,
this contract
that's
here?
another addition that just came in July of last year is a proof of funds attached or not. It used to be up to the seller's agents to request them before, but now they've added the box there. So, I mean, if you're paying cash, you should have proof of funds on hand to give, or at least a letter written from a bank or something like that. The mortgage, I always get so many questions about this part here. You're giving the sellers a rough understanding of how the buyers intend to pay for this transaction. You do not need to go back and change it. If they're getting a mortgage for $1 million, now it's only 800. It doesn't matter. You're giving them a rough idea for, and the easiest thing to do is just do whatever number in here you already have your pre-approval letter written for.
Mm-hmm.
Your buyer's not tied to this financing. Look, buyer intends to obtain a first mortgage loan in this amount. If you already have a pre-approval letter, well, this is a 1-5 house. You already have a pre-approval letter for 1-1, but they intend to get a mortgage on this for 1-180 now because the property is 80 grand more than the last one. Just put the 1-1 in here and send over the old pre-approval letter and keep things moving. They're not tied to these numbers here. A lot of newer agents, for some reason, I think get so tied up in this part here. You're just simply giving the seller an understanding of how the buyer intends to pay for it. On the South Carolina contract, they make you break it down a little bit more. How much are they putting down? How much is their mortgage with actual dollar amounts? But in North Carolina, if they've already been pre-approved for something that's in the ballpark of what they're getting, plug it in here, move along.
But that could change if you, for some reason, go to FHA, then you then have to create an addendum, correct?
Yeah, then there's a separate FHA. Same with the VA, also has an addendum that's required as well. So yes, I mean, obviously, if you're going FHA or VA, that's why there's check marks for that here, because that is a material item to the sellers, whether you're doing conventional FHA or VA to it, because there's different requirements on the seller side for an FHA and a VA loan than there is in conventional, for example. So yes, and then there is also other addendums that also then supersede language about appraisals and inspections and all that sort of stuff. So yes, if they are doing FHA or VA and you know about it at the time of writing the contract, then check the box. If they switch 2 weeks later, the onus is not on you to then go back and update this. You then just need to get the addendum stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, they also added a second mortgage, other funds. Now, this would be if they're getting a large gift from grandma or something like that. They want us to disclose more of this because they realize the old disclosure is kind of insufficient here, but it is what it is. For right now, if they're getting a regular mortgage, just go with it like that.
This is a good part to talk about.
Yeah, so
Contingencies or not. There is no contingencies with this contract, just so you guys know.
that's right. There's no
No
contingencies for anything in the default contract. So yes, now obviously if they, there's two different ways that you can do this here. You can just check that they do, if they have another property that they need to sell, you can check that they do need to sell it if you intend to make the contract contingent on that other sale. In the last 7 years, that hasn't been a very good way to get contracts accepted because contingencies are looked at as, I don't know, the
Bad.
third redheaded stepchild, I guess. But so the other way of doing it, or just
So that's, I just want to point out this box here because even if you check the box saying they have another property to sell, this contract is not conditioned upon that sale. Like
right.
you're still going to have to pay due diligence fees. You're not going to get them back if your other house doesn't sell.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
still,
it's still a contract.
there used to be a contingent. There used to be a way you could have a contingency in North Carolina, but they've removed it now. And it's just literally due diligence. If you sell your house, great. If you don't, you don't get
Yeah.
it back.
Basically what they're trying, and even if you look at the contingency addendum, it is
There isn't one anymore.
Watered down. No,
There
I
is-
think I thought there was contingent to close.
You have to get you have to get appropriate contingency addendum drafted by a North Carolina real
Okay.
estate attorney. They got rid of the whole
Yeah,
addendum.
so the better way of writing the contracts is just that to explain to your buyer that there is not really a good contingency on selling your current house. A lot of times, even if they do have to sell a house, I'll write that they do not have to sell this house because the goal is to get their current house under contract, but by the end of due diligence. So, I mean, what they're trying to get these contracts to go to is just 100%. It's just due diligence and then nothing. Okay. That's the way that all of these have been going for the last 15, 20 years. So if you're worried about the timing on selling their house, try to get a little bit longer of due diligence. But a lot of times for me, Personally, I'll write that they do not have to sell another property. Extend the due diligence out 25, 28 days, something like that, and then get their house on the market ASAP, and then try to line up the dates of both due diligence on both houses. In a perfect world, I'd have the house that they're selling 1 or 2 days before. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll try to push for like a 28 or say 27-day due diligence on their offer. And then we get their house under contract. If it gets under contract soon, I'll try to only let that buyer have 20 days or 21 days to try to keep those time frames the same. In essence, then you're building a contingency for your sellers, right? If their house doesn't sell or the buyer backs out during due diligence, well, then they just have to back out of their contract and lose their due diligence. That's, you know, that's how it's being done. I'm not going to say that that's the best way or not. I think that there should be a little bit better of a contingency for buyers, especially where it says that their house is under contract already. They should be having a little bit more comfort in the fact that if something happens to the buyer of their house the day before closing, that they're not going to lose their earnest money and due diligence if they've done everything that they can in their power. I think that's kind of a little bit backwards, but you know, I didn't write these forms, so they didn't ask me.
How many people have you seen go through with getting the attorney to write a bid?
I've never had an attorney do that.
I've had 1 or 2. Well, the contingency, I had some people come down from another state, and they got their realtor up there to give them the one that they use, and they use that down here. I mean, buyers and sellers can agree to anything. That we don't need to be a part of it as a North Carolina realtor, right? But a buyer can send over other addendums in here and just say, hey, contingency addendum. So these people, you know, I think the realtor up in wherever they're coming from was like their sister or sister-in-law or something like that. So she was like, oh, we got a contingency up here. We'll use that. So, I mean, if I was doing this for, you know, $1 or $2 million house, and we had I just did a deal where there was over $100,000 in the combination of due diligence and earnest money on the line. I mean, I would certainly be seeking real counsel on that. Because if their house is under contract, then it's not at their mercy, you know, to do anything, right? They should have better protections for that, I think. But you're running into it a lot. And it's really tricky. People move from other states to this state and selling another house in Colorado while they move to Charlotte. I mean, that's happening every single day.
And a lot of other states have all these contingencies. Yeah. I mean, even South Carolina has contingencies.
Yeah.
And our contract just no
And
contingency.
10 years ago, ours had a great one. But they're just trying to get away from all these contingencies just to have it be a true due diligence state where just everything you guys want to do needs to be taken care of during due diligence. That's why sometimes you'll see agents now, they're writing contracts where like due diligence is up on like the Monday and closing's like that Thursday. You're like, because agents are just trying to get the due diligence extended out as far as possible. And then the closing, you know, it's like everyone's coming up with their own little way to manage those like time frames. But it just seems like from everything I'm reading that they're trying to get away from any type of contingency. You know,
It
South
simplifies
Carolina,
things for
Yeah.
sure. It simplifies things. Either you're going to close on the house or you're not.
yeah,
You
you're
know,
gonna
I mean,
lose your
you
money
figure
if
it
you're
out
not.
in the meantime.
Yeah.
I'm assuming Monique had both of these in the MLS. So the
Property
mineral
disclosures.
oil, gas rights, property disclosure. Definitely check the right box here, because if you have not received these documents at the time that you're making the offer,
Yeah.
then that does give you a out actually later on if you don't get these documents from the seller. So,
Yeah.
and I've actually used that before to get out of a contract because we didn't get the seller
Yeah, the only people that are
disclosures.
really exempt on those are foreclosures and new construction.
Mhm.
Everybody else, I don't care if it's a flipper or a wholesaler or whatever, everybody else should be providing disclosures.
Okay, read through the buyer. Seller representations. How do we own the property? How long have we owned it? Believe they've owned it for at least 1 year. Yep. And the reason for this is to discuss the whole flipping thing. Are they flipping this home? Did they buy it within the last year? Have they made improvements and now are they selling it within a year? That's so that the buyer understands what they're buying.
Yeah.
And one thing, like if you do see they run it less than a year and you're making an FHA offer on it,
Mm.
you need to get with your lender
Mm.
and make sure that we're ensuring that we're not in any of those overlap, et cetera.
Yeah, for the
It's-
appraisals and all that stuff. Yeah.
Very good point.
If they're selling it within a year for more than what they bought it for, we're gonna require 2 appraisals, and the buyer is not allowed to pay for that appraisal. So typically, we want to see the seller pay.
Okay.
Something to send that around to, I mean, and Charlotte's a hot market for books, so I did not know that, so that might be
Yeah.
something good to sort of send out to all of our.
Tip of the week. This home was built in 1969, so we are going to need the lead-based paint.
Yeah.
Yes, all of Monique's got everything in there. Now, this property does not have an HOA, I believe. That is correct. So we would not be completing any of this. And the reason there's 2 sections here is because some properties have more than 1 HOA. So you do need to complete both sections if there's 2 HOAs. And you would get this information from the listing agent, from the MLS. If you cannot get that information from either of those people, make sure you verify before your buyers make an offer on this property, because the cost of the HOA may be very important to them. The restrictions of the HOA may be very important to them.
It's also on the property disclosure statements too, or
It should be if they build them out completely. Fuel tanks. To the best of the seller's knowledge, there is or is not a fuel tank. Again, this is like a seller question. So if you have not had this conversation with the seller, you could leave this part for them to complete later on. If we've had a conversation and we know that they confirm that that is not a part of this property, then we can
Yeah.
check that box.
Basically, if you're checking these boxes, you need to know that what it is. You're not just checking them to fill out the offer. You need to have actual knowledge about it, because if something were to come back and challenge the contract, they'd say, well, who checked this box here? And then did that person have credible knowledge that why they were checking it? So
Yeah.
again, it is okay to leave some of these boxes unchecked for
Mhm.
the listing agent and sellers to fill out.
Sure.
But you're predominantly only going to come across this on homes built really before like 1950
Mhm.
is when they still had, fuel storage tanks under buildings. So in Charlotte, it's a lot more of like in Myers Park and Dilworth, there's still a lot of houses with underground fuel storage tanks. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes they've had them filled with sand and sealed and stuff. So it's not always a problem just because they have one. It's just you need to understand the knowledge, to have the knowledge of it.
And they definitely got a lot more
They added
informative
yeah.
here, because now, I mean, there are houses that still use fuel tanks to fuel their
Yeah.
fireplace or something, and they might be leasing that tank from a company, and you need to know that, and who's the
Yeah.
company and how much fuel is in it, and does the fuel have any value? And that's why this whole section here exists.
Yeah, like Suburban Propane and those people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, rural areas in general where there's not gas to the houses, they use either propane or natural gas tanks. But the tanks are typically owned by Suburban Propane or whoever the provider is.
We need to disclose if there's any leases on the property. Again, this is
Yeah.
a seller question. So if you have not had this conversation, leave it for the seller to complete. Moving right along, lots of things to read here. And in case you guys didn't notice, these blue boxes, they've made them blue and they set them out differently so that you will read them, because they're extra important.
Yeah, they just started adding these notes in the last few years to try to clarify things that weren't very clear before, and hopes that buyers,
Pay attention.
will pay attention to them.
Yeah. I always tell my buyers that, like, I know it's difficult to read through this whole thing, and I hope you do, and I've explained it to you, but if anything, pay attention to what's written in all of the blanks and what's checked and what's in the blue boxes, because those are the most important items. Okay, deeds, taxes, and fees. So if you read this section, Preparation deed, all documents, form sellers, state and county taxes. The deed is to be made to the buyer, a corporation, limited liability company. Buyer is the sole owner, shareholder, a trust for which buyer is the beneficiary, any relative of buyer, and or other. So I read this as like, you don't need to put anything here unless your buyer is not one of those categories.
Yeah,
How
I
do
mean,
you
a
read
lot of
that?
people just fill in the buyer's names if it's just a normal purchase or sale, or if it's an LLC, you put the LLC here. I mean, if this is to notify the attorney too, like if the people have a trust, you know, if it's.
I mean, yeah,
More common
if
is
you
people having trusts in there. Or
put the
LLCs.
names of the people that are on the buyer's line at the top, it's just redundant, but it's
Yeah,
it's
they
just-
added this insert names only, which is kind of weird because they have all these other things that it could be, but because I always used to just write the buyer's names out, like Mr. and Mrs. Smith or TBD,
Mhm.
but they don't like us writing or TBD. But that was to combat like people that were trying to flip contracts. People were trying to like put things under contract, like especially new construction and stuff. They're trying to put it under contract and then like resell their contracts that they were putting TBD. But yeah, it's not that big of a.
I'm just
thing.
rewriting my name on that line.
But yeah, the more important line is this. If your buyer is getting any seller paid closing costs, they need to be in here, which is really popular. It's getting more and more popular. Seller paid closing costs.
Coming back.
Yeah, it's coming back. Also, if they were, if the seller's providing $5,000 to buy down your rate, that still goes on this line. That you don't need anything separate from that. I've had a couple questions about that. That's still just a seller paid closing cost for the buyer, goes on here. So a lot of things, go in this line. I don't like the fact that if you're not putting anything in here, you can't now put in NA anymore because the fields are locked only for numbers. So I usually put like a -0.00 because I don't really like leaving a box like this just blank for interpretation down the line. So, but yeah, and sometimes if your computer lets you can even put a dash line before that so somebody couldn't write in a number there. But yeah, I mean, anything that the sellers are giving the buyer of monetary value outside of a home warranty needs to be placed on that line. So I don't care if they're calling it a buy down, if they're calling it a this, if they're calling it a that, it still goes on that line.
Is there a place to note what it is or what it's for?
No, the lender doesn't care. They just need to know the dollar amount, and that's all that's important.
But it has to be on the CD. This can't be like an outside of the closing type arrangement.
Yeah,
Right.
we look at different options to what to do with that money.
Mm-hmm. You're like, I have this money to work with. What's going to be the best way to use it
Exactly. We
for this
want to do a
buyer?
permanent buy down, we want to do a temporary buy down, pay for closing
Mhm.
costs. So that's
Yeah.
where we love buyers' expenses. To show them a lot of different options.
Yeah.
Here's 5%
And they're like,
down, here's 10%
oh.
down.
Yeah, and they're sometimes pleasantly surprised at what you can do with that money.
Yeah.
I'm just a big fan of those because that can be cold hard savings up front versus a price reduction. You're extending savings over 30 years with a price reduction. This is money that they can save day one.
Yeah.
We can save it a lot of money over their monthly payment in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it just makes that savings a lot more tangible if you negotiate that.
Yeah, and one other thing, scroll back up. One other thing that I'm starting to see on this line, especially for realtors that are at these firms that are still taking like 30, 40, 50% of their commission, is if they are asking for seller paid closing costs so that their buyer doesn't have to make up the differential in the commission. So for instance, if the sellers are only offering 2%, but your agreement says 2.5%, or for some of these old school firms, the agreements still say 3%, and they're essentially forcing their agents to do it more so than they were a year ago before any of these lawsuits went down. But what they're doing is they're asking for like, hey, I need another 1% or 0.5%. And this is where you would put it if you or your buyers are trying to do that. It is 100% acceptable. Instead of your buyers at closing coming with another $5,000 to make up the differential and the commissions that you guys have agreed upon, you can also ask it from the seller in your offer right here. And then it just essentially the way it works at settlement is the seller pays the buyer $5,000 or whatever it is, and then the buyer is transferring it to your firm, the same money. So you're starting to see that more and more, even on expensive houses where the buyers quote unquote don't need closing costs. You're starting to see agents use that as a way of, so they tell their buyers like, well, you're not paying the difference in commission, right? The seller is. So I don't, if anybody sees that and you might see that on the listing side, but also if you and your buyers come across that issue as well, that's a good spot to plug it in.
Were you going to ask? Oh, okay. Yeah. Good question. But if you were also getting a combination of buy downs or,
Yeah.
you would have to lump it all together. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the only thing, and Matt can go with this, and obviously on a $1.5 million house, there's plenty of room to work with, but on like a $350,000 house, I mean, most lenders are still seeing credits capped out at like 3%. And so if your buyer needs 1 or 2% for closing costs, and then you're trying to get 1 or 2% for your commission, the closing cost credit here can still not go beyond what your buyer is able to get from the lender. The lender doesn't know who's getting the money at the end of the day. They just looking at the total credit. So, I mean, on $1.5 million houses, you're probably not seeing it, but
Yeah, on the smaller ones, so is the question about the seller credit going towards their expenses or buyer's agent commission?
Well, the allowable
total credits is
yeah.
what I'm saying is one number, even if you're divvying it up to 3 different buckets.
Yeah,
Technically.
so my understanding is that if it is specified on an addendum that there is this much to pay buyer's agent expenses, that does not count towards the allowable level.
Okay.
And then kind of the magic number for conventional financing is 10% down. Under 10% down, you have 3%. Over 10%, you have 6%.
Okay. Good to know.
I will add that to mine.
So you're
Yeah.
spelling that out, you're spelling out the buckets on the addendum.
If you're running up into these books,
Well-
if you're running over, like, if you're over 3%, if the number that you plug in there is going to be over the 3% of the purchase price, then yes, you might need to do an addendum and show where those funds are going, like X for closing costs or X in lieu of repairs or whatever, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I just was thinking, closing costs and commission and something else, like where are you writing that? If that's just one lump sum, where are you spelling that out?
There is no addendum specifically
Well,
for it.
confirmation of compensation could
Yeah, but
say
that
that
wouldn't break
it's,
out what these two numbers are.
Yeah,
There's
but it
not an
would-
addendum specifically designed to break those numbers
And
out.
that's really just for the lender anyway.
Correct. Correct. Yep.
and
And like you said, it depends on how much money they're putting down, the purchase price. There's a lot of things at play, whether it's FHA or VA or conventional. Like, there's a lot of things at play. Just rule of experience of thumbs. Like, if that number is going to need to be more than 3%, because if you remember, like, think about it from a lender's perspective. What happens with this a lot of times, in practical purposes, is you put, say, 2% on there, right? So let's say, $500,000 house, you put 10 grand on there. Then the inspections come through. Then you sign an addendum and you realize there's another 8, 9, 10 grand worth of repairs, right? Then you sign an addendum. That addendum is changing this exact line here. And it'll say it's changing it from 10 grand to 20 grand. Well, now all of a sudden, now you've triggered stuff. But now the buyer's like, well, wait a second, I got to get a roof replaced and I got to pay this commission and I need my closing costs. And then that's when he's saying, like, then you really need to try to have an addendum to try to help the underwriter understand that, like, hey, only X of this is going through closing costs. Some of this is going to the buyer's agent commission or whatever is doing. But that usually agents just don't realize it till they need to go do that addendum for repairs. And then that line where it says it's changing the seller paid closing costs from blank to blank. This is exactly the line that it's changing in the contract. And then that's typically when they trigger some sort of
flag.
with and then that's when they're like, oh crap. And then, we had an agent in this office just 6 months ago or whatever. He's like, oh, we have $1,800 that this buyer's mad. He's not going to be able to use it. The lender said we're capped out. I was like, call the HOA and get a bill for like 2 years. And that worked. But I mean, I'm not
Prepaid
sure. Matt might say
HOAs.
we're not technically supposed to do that. But like, at least then they're getting to use the money somehow because like they're not checking on what the HOA dues are. So I just had them, they were like $680 a year or something like that. I just had them just like, hey, let's just send them 2 years worth of dues, and that took care of a lot of the credit. But yeah.
I think where I get all that, I'm getting a little bit confused though, when you break out that addendum, if part of it is for commission, for instance, and that commission can't be part of that contract, you can't break that out on that addendum.
We
Well,
don't,
it's the addendum would be more for the purposes of the underwriter. And sometimes they're not even calling it addendum, it's calling it, just, we need a letter of explanation, like
Letter of
an LOE
explanation.
about where these funds are going. But yeah, there is no standard addendum to break out those dollars, right?
And-
So you would just be trying to work with the lender to be like, hey, actually, some of this stuff is this, because you know, at the end of the day, what you're trying to avoid there is you're trying to avoid ever having to send like the inspection items over to the lender, right? Because then the underwriter's gonna be like, whoa, wait a second here. You want to avoid ever having to send them the inspection. Don't ever send your inspection or your due diligence request. They never ever should go to the lender. I don't care how many numbers are on there. The due diligence, DDRA, and inspections should never ever be going to the lender. I can't think of one circumstance where that would be a good idea.
No,
Okay,
we don't
all right.
know anything about that. We trust
That's
that
right.
you have done your due diligence. Just let us know how much more you're getting.
Yes.
And we'll handle it from there. Because if you send over request and it kind of slides past the processor and we send it over and it's like to fix the leaky roof, well, guess what? You're not closing on that home until
Right.
the leaky roof is fixed.
Right, and then you got an issue because the seller's not getting the fix, they're giving a credit, and the buyer can't have their contractor over there because the seller's still living there, so. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, like the addendum, what you're trying to avoid in the addendum is like, you know, and same thing with on here, like, you'll have agents write in things on this other field of like, oh, the $5,000 is like in lieu of repairs. Well, then the lender's like, well, what repairs? Well, we need to see that those repairs have been completed before closing. And then you're like, well, no, that's not the point of a credit. It is to do them after closing, but then they'll become conditions of the file that need to be met before closing. So
That's simple as an additional $5,000 in seller credits. That's all.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
and DDRAs, due diligence repair requests, should never have like numbers on them either.
Yeah.
That's just to communicate repairs that you're requesting. You shouldn't say, here's all the repairs, but we want $5,000 instead.
Right.
That's not where you
Now,
say that.
You can use it as a negotiating tactic. Hey, my buyer wants these, and list out all the numbers from your home inspector report, or credit of $5,000 in lieu of repairs. As a negotiation, that is okay to do, but those would need to be then changed to the.
That would be a
agreement to amend the
true
contract.
amendment to the contract. The due diligence repair request doesn't amend the contract, so don't use that to amend the
Right.
contract.
Yeah, I was getting that more. So here, it's just like if
Yeah.
you're running up against 3%
Yeah,
here,
be careful.
beware that come negotiations around repairs, you might be up against a ceiling.
Okay, home warranty.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much straightforward. I
Maybe
love
buyer
using
will
First
get
American, home warranty. I think we've got some of, Martinez.
He's a great guy.
He's a great guy, fantastic guy. He does a lot of
Martinez
stuff with us. And so I'm not someone who just, submits something or promotes something that I haven't used. So I actually signed myself up for one of their warranties at my own house that I'm paying for out of pocket that my sellers didn't pay for. And they've already been out to my house 3 times since August.
So you're getting your
Haven't
money's
had
worth.
any issues with First American.
I had experience with, with a company, they replaced both my HVAC systems, a bunch of plumbing stuff.
The Old Republic,
No, it's.
First
It was
American,
the
There's American Home
LMK
Shield.
American Home Shield. No? Okay.
220, 210.
Oh, 210
Mhm.
home warranty. Yeah.
And I got a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, 210 home warranty is good. They're a little bit more expensive than the other ones. They're a lot of times used in newer construction because builders, they have a big builder business at 210. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, the point of it in this contract here is if your buyer want a warranty and you want to do it, just make sure you go on their website and look at the cost.
Yeah,
I typically use First American or Home or Old Republic because I have the most experience with them. And they have websites where I can buy the warrant or I can order the warranties in 7 minutes before closing.
because he forgot.
And it literally like emails it right to the paralegal.
And he needs the invoice.
Yeah, and I need the invoice and it's like, we're at closing.
Would you say for your warranty, was that like a pricing that makes sense
Yeah,
for
per
what you
house,
got?
it's expensive, because the reason I say that about the price is because like now it changes things if there's multiple HVACs on a property, if
Increases
there's
it, yeah.
if some of them are doing additional fees for homes that are over 30 years old. So yeah, just whatever warranty you want, feel good about it, get your buyers to get it, but just make sure you go on there and figure out what the cost is prior to going in. Some of them have different things for square footage, number of, there's a lot of different things.
Possession, we need to not select one of these boxes or do select one of these
Right,
boxes.
and then use addition, a
And then we're,
separate form.
yes, you need to
Yeah.
use buyer possession before closing agreement or seller possession before closing agreement. Those are pretty common. I mean, people use those quite a bit.
Yes.
Some people
yeah.
are scared of those things. I mean, I know there's always issues that can happen, but
There are
I've
always
had pretty
issues,
pretty
but
good
yeah.
success with them, of seller possessions after closing. You just have to be
Yeah.
very clear with everybody about what the
It just needs
expectations
to be
are.
a short, this isn't
Yeah.
something where you can have a 6-month lease. This is not a lease. This is a possession agreement. Yeah, it needs to be under, I would.
Ours
suggest
says in
under 30
14.
days.
I thought it
Yeah,
only goes
now
for
they're going down
14
to
days.
14
But
after that.
he's
they
saying
want
for
to
lending purposes, you need to move into the house by
within
that
60
time.
days. But yeah.
Yeah.
I had always been instructed and always just done it this way. Like, these are things for 30 days or less. Use these. North Carolina is going down to even 14 and 15 days on some of these because there's just so many issues. And it's not worded like a real lease. Like, for instance, who has the insurance coverage, right? Things like that would be covered in a more traditional lease.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And then we have
So you're
all
saying
of
North Carolina is not limiting those to 14 days?
one of two of them.
seller
One of these two
possession
forms, yeah.
after closing only allows for 14 days. And then it says if you're going to be staying longer than 14 days, you need to use a lease, basically.
Yeah.
That's what it says. And then we have all of our check boxes for all of the various addenda, and we're going to check additional provisions addendum because we're going to do that one real quick. Also on here, we would have the lead-based paint would be attached.
I'll also note that bill of sale is not on here for a reason. Like we were talking about,
because
anything checked on here has to go to the lender.
yeah, yep.
Okay.
DDRA is not on here.
Yeah.
No.
And then also you just, on the last box, I mean, I used to be guilty of this a long time ago because they didn't have it. They used to just call it other, and I would just use it to free will write in whatever I wanted. You're not allowed to do that
Don't do that.
anymore. Like if any of you are, stuck in those old habits, it's
Yeah.
not just an other box anymore.
You can't write whatever you want. I mean,
Yeah.
that exists. It says for attorney or party drafted addenda. So
Right.
it's documents that were either drafted by an attorney or parties to the contract, which is the buyer and the seller.
Yes.
They can draft addenda. You cannot draft addenda for them. You shouldn't. Okay.
No, 100%. You should definitely not do that.
Yeah.
And to take it even one step further, I'm pretty sure our E&O and most E&O policies, if you draft one addendum, they will not cover you for anything of the transaction. So just think about it that way. If you just think, I just got a Word doc here, and I'll just type some stuff up with a name and a date, have your buyer do it.
But a lot of times what you have here is like if it's a relocation home,
Yes.
and they have their own addenda that must be signed by everybody.
Right,
So that's where you would put that.
foreclosures,
Open
yeah.
Door has a thing that goes here. Like those kinds of companies are going to have addenda, and they can draft it because they're a party to the contract.
That's right.
Sorry, we're running over time, guys. This always happens. Why does it always happen? All right. I think we accidentally skipped some stuff here, but we were pretty much, oh my gosh, we skipped a lot. Just went down to the bottom. Jeez. Can't skip that. Okay. We were at pretty much the end, and then we're just obviously going to, yeah. Nothing else to fill out except for signatures and initials, or if they're, an entity, you would put them down there. Wire fraud warning for your people to read. Red boxes are even more important than blue boxes.
Right, sure.
I do not ever fill out the seller notice address, buyer notice
No.
address. I mean,
It's only to be used if there's not agents down
not
below.
agents involved,
Yeah.
But then we have all this agent information. Please make sure that it's all correct. If your forms file, if your profile in your forms is completely filled out appropriately, all of this will auto-populate there.
Or most of it.
Most of it, yeah.
And just, I
Um,
mean, when you're making an offer, just fill in the other agent's information. It's just tacky and amateur hour if you only have your side filled in.
mhm.
I know technically you only need to fill in your side. It's 2 extra clicks on the MLS to click on the agent's name to see what their license number is, and that's a. Just go ahead and do it. It makes yourself look like a professional instead of an amateur.
But it did already bring most of it over because I had
Yeah.
put that MLS number in at the beginning. It's going to pull it a lot of it over.
Yeah, so on
What I'm
MLS, you would just
missing.
click on the firm link underneath the buyer's name or underneath the seller's agent. So if you go down here and click on the link, that's the firm name. So, I mean, obviously in this example, it's us, but here's all the other information that it didn't bring over.
Mhm.
Okay.
It was only
Here's
the
our
firm license that
license
didn't come
and
over.
address it doesn't bring over.
Yeah. So you can just grab that.
But
and-
yeah, all those things go on the closing, settlements form. So just, do that.
Okay.
Then let's talk about this page. I mean, this is probably the last page that we really need to do. Okay, so does every box on this page need to be, every checkbox on this page need to be checked at the end of the contract?
Nope.
No, thank you. There's a lot of people that get mixed up that, oh, I'm missing one of these on here. Like, no, this is just people that touch the due diligence and earnest money. If they wire straight to the closing attorney, you're only going to get the closing attorney to check it off. Okay. If they drop it off in the mailbox of the seller, only the seller needs to sign for the due diligence. All these boxes in most transactions will not be checked.
Yeah.
I had an agent yell at me one time.
Yeah.
Because I didn't.
You didn't complete
I
page
didn't-
17 or whatever it is now.
I was the seller. I was representing the seller, and he sent it to me, and he wanted me to sign that I had received the due diligence. I never saw the.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I just had my broker in charge of my old firm call. and
Yes.
I received it.
That's why I asked that question, because we get it all the time. You didn't complete page 17. Like, it is. There might only be 2 of the boxes checked. That's considered complete.
Wow.
Okay. All right, now professional services disclosure, you just sort of need to have them.
Well, this I'm
Check.
including, you wouldn't normally include this when you're
Right
writing an
now,
offer for
yeah.
somebody. This is something that you would do down the line, probably a week or 2 into the due diligence period when you've had an opportunity to discuss all of these services with your buyer and which ones they're going to elect and which ones they're not going to elect. The reason I'm bringing it up today is because there seems to be an epidemic in our firm of people not understanding what this form is for or getting it completed. Why do we have to do it? Why do we have to do it? Because it's a CYA form. It's covering your butt if something happens down the line where your buyer says, well, nobody ever told me I was supposed to get a survey when I bought a house. And if you
Yeah.
have this form, it shows them that you explained why surveys are important and they acknowledge that they didn't want to get one. And that's why we have this form. I've just heard that like most of our agents are not filling this out completely. So please take the time
Yeah, and
for
if you
each
remember, this
section.
used to all be blank over here. We used to supposed to have to fill it out on our own, but now the states even filled it in mostly for you. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's another like CYA, it's another like, E&O insurance type thing that comes up.
Mhm.
It's just a pain in the butt, but it gives you peace of mind that, whoever's doing this understands at least that they have the ability to hire whoever they want to
Mhm.
for these services. That's all the only way I describe to my clients.
Yeah.
If they get to, no, go ahead.
You put multiple service providers for each of those, or just?
Oh,
a lot
like
of
for the
times I
home
don't.
inspection, like do you offer more than one referral for that?
In practice, yes. On this form, I don't typically, but
Well, it's
In
whoever they
practice-
selected. So if they selected Home Inspection Carolina, that's the one you're putting on here. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is not like, here's all the people you can choose for these services. This is like, what service did you
selected
choose?
these.
Who
Yeah,
did it? And then they have to initial it. Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's going to be some not applicable things because if the house doesn't have a pool, like that's not applicable to this
Yeah,
house.
just leave it blank.
So, okay, just wanted to point out that form, and then we'll just do additional provisions addendum.
Yeah, so additional provisions
Logan does
addendum.
this.
The main thing that you're going to use it for, that you should be using it for, is expiration of offers. So, I mean, anytime you're representing a buyer, but it's certainly when the market is pretty
Sorry.
strong,
Sorry.
it's just good practice to have an expiration on the offer. It just kind of keeps the selling and the listing agent a little bit more, honest and on top of things. There's no right or wrong for how, the expiration is kind of up to your clients. 24 hours, 12 hours, 36 hours. I don't think I've really done one that would be longer than 36 hours typically. A lot of times if I'm sending over an offer at like 5 o'clock tonight and I think it's a hot property, I'm asking for an answer by like noon tomorrow. They can counter me back on it all they want, but I want them to know that like we're serious, we're not waiting around, there's an expiration on this offer. So that's typically what you're going to use. This is like a catch-all form that in North Carolina created. But typically you're going to do it, and you just put an X in the boxes that you need to do. You're going to plug in the date and then
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm putting the wrong time. I'm putting in the wrong spot.
there. So it's whatever time.
Yeah, I don't have to put PM.
5 o'clock PM, and then you put the date in the next field. So, but yeah, I mean, you should be using this. If you scroll down a little bit more, or it might be on the second page now. Yeah, okay. So the other part that I use this for is number 4. So a lot of times you'll see probably in the agent remarks in the MLS, like water heater is going to be swapped out on the 23rd or whatever, like they're telling you, or windows have been ordered, or, a lot of times it's like, I was at a house the other day, we made an offer on the hood, on the range that the hood goes up and down, that was broken. They already ordered it. It was going to be installed on whatever date. So anytime you see something like that, that is a repair that you want to make part of the offer that has nothing to do with future repair negotiations, that the seller's already said that something is going to happen. I've even seen this in condos where there's some like HOA damages and the HOA is still repairing like a roof or a ceiling or whatever. All that stuff needs to be put in here. And a lot of times you're just kind of copying what the other agent already has in the agent remarks on MLS. You just want them to hold up what they said they were going to do here. But that's typically the only other part of this, additional provisions addendum that I use is if there's something that needs to be repaired or replaced that everyone knows about up front that you don't want to deal with in repairs down the road, just plug it in.
And it could be something that your buyers are going to make a requirement that they saw at like the showing. Like maybe at the showing, they saw that the window was broken. Then maybe the sellers didn't disclose that, but your people are like, I don't want to buy this house unless they replace the window.
Right.
You would put that in here so that they're agreeing to it up front because it's something you already know that needs to be done.
And then the caveat would come out that the lender also needs to see this form. But I would say more than 50% of the time, when I go back to redo the final contract, when we're about to go under contract, I remove the additional provisions addendum because it typically just has an expiration on it. And that expiration has already come and gone because now we're signing everything 2 days later or 3 days later or whatever. So a lot of times on the offer to purchase, I'll uncheck that additional provisions addendum box if the only thing I used it for was the expiration of the offer, because I just don't want anyone to call up the validity of the contract 2 weeks down the road saying, wait a second, everybody didn't sign here before the expiration of this offer. So if I don't have repairs on it, a lot of times I'm just taking off that expiration. So,
And also if you're doing things up the lake, if there's a separate boat slip for that property, you would definitely have to put that on this form as well. So it does cover a lot of things. It's just that some are more used than others. The expiration is probably the most popular use for this document. And then the repairs is probably secondary to that.
They'll eventually have like those gas tanks and all that stuff on this form. They don't need to be on the offer. It's like the same thing with the mobile homes and the stuff that they just added. Like those don't need to be on every single contract. They'll eventually get that stuff onto this additional provisions addendum. But
the evolution of the contract,
right,
always changing. And I think that's all we have time to go over today.
Yeah,
but
we
wanted to really hit the contract, and we got a couple of other documents in there as well.
Yeah, we'll do South Carolina.
Yeah.
I think in June or
Yeah,
sometime this summer we'll
probably
also
be
do a
June.
similar class of this on the South Carolina contract as well, because it is 180%, 180 degrees different from this North Carolina one.
Mhm.
The premise is obviously still the same, but not. So the only thing I wanted Allison to do really quick that I want everyone to see, well, actually, it doesn't apply to the contract.
Mm.
The only thing I was going to bring up is the other big issue that we have with compliance of these forms here is that when you hit the prepare signatures and it nicely for you, fills in all the places where it believes you should have a buyer or seller signature. Not all of those are applicable 100% of the time. For instance, on the listing agreement, you cannot have all the boxes checked for what type of agency the seller is agreeing to. Okay, that doesn't make sense. They can't agree to allow dual agency and the box under it to not allow dual agency. Same thing with the buyer's agency agreement. There's several boxes on both of those in North Carolina that do not need to be checked. And in fact, you can't have them all checked. So I'll just say that once you fill,
Yeah,
once you
for
click the
example,
signature,
For example, like this initial here, it's pre-populating this initial, but it does that even for like all of the like when you're doing the buyer's agency, there's all these
Yeah.
areas. It already puts it there, but you don't need it in every area. So you have to go in there and delete it. So you click on it and you delete it if you don't want your person to see that initialed
or you
area
can
at
just use the
all.
delete button on your computer once it's highlighted.
Or
yeah.
sometimes the initials come through as optional. So especially on the buyer's agency, they come through as optional for dual agency and all that. You
Right.
can change the initials over here. You can
Well-
change them from optional to required.
Also, if you hit the drop down, it'll be grayed out. And then, yeah, you can hit optional or read only, whatever. From
Yeah,
there.
but if
From there.
optional is checked, your people are going to get the option to sign that area. And sometimes you don't want them to have options. You just want them to click it
You
and sign
require
it.
Yeah.
So just, we want to point out that that's a functionality of this DigiSign platform. And I think a lot of people don't,
Yeah.
know
all these
that?
platforms, a lot of agents, as soon as they hit the prepare signature, they see it all there.
they just send it.
And
You've
that's all
still
I'm just
gotta
saying.
go
It's like,
through.
Go through one other. This is your chance to like proofread what you just did on the previous screen.
Yeah, there's unfortunately in the contract, there's not really
But
any
also,
examples
what
of
you're
that.
mainly doing in here, a lot of times, if anything was crossed through or changed from the original offer, then you're adding initial fields like out in the margin on things that were probably changed or crossed through, or you changed the personal property or whatever. That's a good time to just add some initials to other things that are being updated.
Yeah. So I guess take your time. Don't just rush through and send things out without making sure that you're asking people to initial the correct things and you're managing your tags, like all these tags when you're tagging the document. But yeah, offer to purchase doesn't really have any of the scenarios we're talking about where you need to manage the tags.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Anybody
right.
have any questions?
Yeah, I need a rush.
Your offer.
Oh, let me send it out for signatures, Monique.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna let everybody get going. Everybody have a great day and thanks for joining us.